The beginning of a journey. Jamal stood nervously at the bustling airport terminal, surrounded by a sea of travelers who seemed worlds apart from him. Business professionals, dressed in neatly pressed suits, spoke rapidly into their phones, while families in matching vacation outfits laughed and tugged colorful luggage behind them. The bright airport lights reflected off gleaming suitcase handles, making everything feel surreal to the 10-year-old boy. He clutched the frayed straps of his small, worn backpack like a lifeline. It held everything important to him. His mom's handwritten note, a change of clothes, and a crumpled photo of his family. His clothes were just as worn as his bag. A faded green t-shirt that hung loosely on his small frame, and a pair of jeans that were 2 sizes too big, held up by a belt with extra holes punched through the leather. This was Jamal's first time in an airport, let alone preparing to board a flight. Everything was overwhelming. The towering departure screens, the robotic voice echoing overhead with flight announcements, and the constant movement of people. His heart pounded against his ribs as he double-checked the crumpled boarding pass in his hand. His mother had saved for months, working extra shifts at the diner to buy this ticket. It was her gift, a chance for Jamal to spend the summer with Aunt Mariah in Atlanta, far from their struggling neighborhood. His mom had said Aunt Mariah's neighborhood had parks, good schools, and a community that looked out for each other. "Next, please." The gate agent's voice rang out, cutting through Jamal's thoughts. He shuffled forward, his worn sneakers barely making a sound on the carpeted floor. The gate agent, a woman with kind eyes and a bright smile, reached for his ticket. Jamal handed it over, his fingers trembling slightly. "First time flying?" she asked kindly as she scanned the ticket. Jamal nodded, his voice catching in his throat. "You'll do great. Just follow the signs when you get off the plane, okay?" "Yes, Mom," he managed to say. She handed the ticket back with a reassuring nod. "Safe travels, sweetheart." Relieved, Jamal walked down the jet bridge, the hum of the plane's engines growing louder with each step. His heart thudded with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Inside the cabin, the cool, conditioned air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Passengers were already settling into their seats, stuffing bags into overhead compartments, and flipping through in-flight magazines. Jamal's eyes darted around trying to locate his seat. 12A, 12A, he whispered, counting the rows. He finally found it, a window seat near the middle of the plane. Carefully, he stowed his backpack under the seat in front of him and sat down, his fingers gripping the armrests. The window gave him a clear view of the runway, where other planes were taxiing, their wings gleaming in the sunlight. As Jamal took in the scene, a flight attendant appeared in the aisle. She was tall, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a crisp uniform that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. Her name tag read Carla. Her sharp blue eyes scanned the rows, pausing when they landed on Jamal. Her expression shifted subtly, curiosity tinged with suspicion. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. "Excuse me, young man," Carla said in a polite but firm tone. "May I see your ticket?" Jamal hesitated but quickly fumbled to hand it over. Carla examined it, her brow furrowing slightly. "You're traveling alone?" she asked. "Yes, Mom," Jamal replied softly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Wait here," she said before turning and walking briskly to the front of the plane. Jamal's stomach twisted. He glanced around, noticing the curious glances from nearby passengers. His palms grew clammy as he clutched the edge of his seat. What was wrong? Had he done something wrong? Minutes felt like hours as Carla spoke quietly with another flight attendant and the gate agent. Their eyes flicked toward Jamal more than once, making his heart race. Finally, Carla returned, her expression unreadable. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane," she said, her voice firm. Jamal's eyes widened in shock. "Why? What did I do?" "It's just a policy issue," she said vaguely. "But I have my ticket," Jamal protested, holding it up. Carla's tone softened slightly. "I understand, but we need to sort something out. Please come with me." Tears stung Jamal's eyes as he reluctantly stood up. He grabbed his backpack and shuffled down the aisle, aware of the weight of every passenger's gaze on him. Back at the gate, Carla crossed her arms, her demeanor stern. "We've had issues with unaccompanied minors sneaking onto flights. Do you have any identification?" Jamal shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have an ID. I just have my ticket. And this." He pulled out the folded note from his mom and handed it to her. Carla unfolded the paper and scanned it briefly. It was a heartfelt letter, written in neat cursive. "To whom it may concern. My name is Angela Carter, and I am Jamal's mother. Please take good care of him on his journey to Atlanta. This trip means everything to us. Thank you for your kindness. Angela Carter." Carla's lips thinned. "This isn't enough. I'm sorry, but without proper identification, I can't let you back on the plane." "But my mom worked so hard to buy that ticket," Jamal said, his voice breaking. "Please, I need to get to my aunt's house. She's waiting for me." Carla's expression remained firm. "I'm sorry," she repeated. Jamal's shoulders slumped as he realized there was nothing he could say to change her mind. His dream of a summer in a safe, happy neighborhood was slipping away. Just then, a commanding voice broke through the tense atmosphere. "Is there a problem here?" A tall, well-dressed man in a tailored suit approached. His salt and pepper hair and confident demeanor exuded authority. Carla straightened. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." The man ignored her and crouched down to Jamal's level. "What's your name, son?" "Jamal," he whispered. The man smiled warmly. "Nice to meet you, Jamal. I'm Mr. Harris. Mind telling me what's going on?" Jamal hesitated but then explained everything. The ticket, his mom, and the trip to his aunt's house. Mr. Harris listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each word. Standing up, he turned to Carla. "This boy has a valid ticket. Why isn't he allowed to board?" Carla faltered. "It's a security concern. We need to verify." "Verify what?" Mr. Harris interrupted. "That he's not a threat. Look at him. He's a child." Passengers nearby began to gather, their curiosity piqued by the confrontation. Jamal's heart raced. Was this stranger going to help him? The tension hung thick in the air as Carla struggled to find a response. Mr. Harris's voice softened but remained firm. "I'm a lawyer, and I can tell you right now that you're treading on thin ice. This boy has rights." Carla's face reddened. "Sir, with all due respect." "With all due respect," Mr. Harris cut in, "I suggest you fix this situation before it becomes a bigger problem." Jamal's hope flickered back to life as he watched Mr. Harris advocate for him. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The confrontation intensifies. The hum of the airport terminal grew louder as more passengers gathered near the gate, their curious eyes fixed on the scene unfolding between Carla, Mr. Harris, and young Jamal. Some whispered to one another, while others simply stood by, arms crossed, waiting to see how it would play out. Jamal's heart thumped hard against his chest, his breath shallowed as he clutched the frayed straps of his backpack. His whole world seemed to be spiraling out of control. Just minutes ago, he had been excited, nervous but hopeful about his first flight and the chance to escape his neighborhood for a summer filled with new possibilities. Now it felt like that dream was slipping through his fingers, unraveling faster than he could hold it together. Mr. Harris, the sharply dressed man who had come to his defense, stood tall with a commanding presence. His voice was calm but edged with authority. "This boy has every right to be on that plane," he insisted, locking eyes with Carla. "You've seen his ticket. What's the real issue here?" Carla shifted uncomfortably, her professional composure starting to crack. "Sir, as I mentioned, this is a security concern. We have protocols when it comes to unaccompanied minors. Without proper identification." Mr. Harris raised a brow. "Proper identification. He's a child, not a fugitive. You've seen the note from his mother, and his ticket matches the passenger manifest. What more do you need?" Passengers nearby nodded in agreement. A woman holding a toddler on her hip muttered, "It's just a kid. This is ridiculous." Carla's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. "We're responsible for the safety of all passengers. If something doesn't check out, we can't take risks." Jamal's voice, small but steady, broke through the tension. "Please, Mom. My mom worked really hard to buy that ticket. I just want to get to my aunt's house. She's waiting for me." Carla's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, doubt flickered in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a hardened expression. "I'm sorry, but rules are rules," she said firmly. "Until we can verify everything, you won't be reboarding that plane." Tears stung Jamal's eyes, but he blinked them back, determined not to cry in front of everyone. He had learned from an early age that showing weakness rarely led to kindness. Mr. Harris's jaw tightened. "I hope you realize this is going to be a PR nightmare for your airline," he said coolly. "You're making a spectacle out of an innocent boy. And for what? Your own unfounded suspicions." Before Carla could respond, the gate manager, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached. Her name tag read Ms. Lopez. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. Carla quickly explained, her tone defensive. "This passenger doesn't have proper identification, and I have concerns about the validity of his ticket." Ms. Lopez frowned. "Is that true?" she asked Jamal gently. Jamal nodded, his voice wavering. "I don't have an ID, but my mom wrote a note, and I have my ticket." He held up the crumpled paper again. Ms. Lopez took the note, reading it carefully. Her expression softened as she looked back at Jamal. "This looks legitimate to me," she said. "Carla, did you check the passenger list? His name should be on it if his ticket is valid." Carla hesitated. "I didn't get that far." "You didn't get that far?" Ms. Lopez's voice rose slightly, disbelief evident. "You pulled a child off a flight without fully verifying the situation." "I was just following protocol," Carla insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Ms. Lopez shook her head. "Protocol doesn't mean making assumptions and humiliating passengers, especially a child." Turning to Jamal, she smiled reassuringly. "Let me make this right for you, okay?" Jamal nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Ms. Lopez tapped on her tablet, quickly pulling up the passenger manifest. Within seconds, she found Jamal's name listed exactly where it should be. "Confirmed," she said firmly. "This young man is a rightful passenger on Flight 237 to Atlanta." Relief washed over Jamal, though he still felt the sting of humiliation. Carla's face went pale. Enough," Ms. Lopez cut her off. "I'll handle this from here. You're dismissed." Carla opened her mouth to protest but thought better of it. With a curt nod, she turned and walked away, her shoulders tense. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, some passengers clapping quietly in support of Jamal. Ms. Lopez knelt down to Jamal's level. "I'm truly sorry for what happened," she said sincerely. "You didn't deserve that." "It's okay," Jamal said softly, though his voice lacked conviction. "No, it's not," Mr. Harris interjected. "But thank you for stepping in and doing the right thing." Ms. Lopez nodded. "We'll make sure he gets back on that plane and has a smooth flight." As Jamal followed Ms. Lopez and Mr. Harris back toward the jet bridge, he glanced over his shoulder at Carla, who stood near the gate, watching them with a conflicted expression. A part of him wanted to be angry, but another part simply felt tired. He had faced judgment before, because of where he came from, how he looked, and what little he had. But this time, something was different. People had stood up for him. As they approached the plane, Ms. Lopez paused. "One more thing, Jamal. You'll be flying first class today. Consider it an apology from the airline." Jamal's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" She smiled. "You deserve it." Mr. Harris clapped a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Looks like your trip just got a whole lot better, kid." As Jamal stepped back onto the plane, his heart felt lighter. The pain of the confrontation still lingered, but the kindness of strangers had restored a flicker of hope. And little did he know, this flight was only the beginning of a journey that would change more lives than just his own. A flight that changes everything. Jamal's heart raced as he walked down the aisle of the plane for the second time, but now under entirely different circumstances. Ms. Lopes led the way, her reassuring presence a stark contrast to Carla's earlier hostility. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation offered warm smiles and nods of encouragement as Jamal passed by. Near the front of the plane, the seats were wider and more luxurious, with plush leather cushions and ample legroom. Jamal had never seen anything like it. He hadn't even known planes could have sections like this. The air smelled faintly of citrus and freshly brewed coffee, a pleasant departure from the cramped, bustling atmosphere at the back. "Here you go, 2A," Ms. Lopes said, gesturing to a window seat near the front. "Enjoy the flight, Jamal." "Thank you, ma'am," he said softly, still a little overwhelmed by everything that had happened. As he settled into the seat, a flight attendant in a pristine uniform approached with a warm smile. She introduced herself as Mia. "Hi, Jamal. Welcome to first class," she said cheerfully. "Can I get you something to drink? Maybe some juice or soda?" "Apple juice, please," Jamal said, his voice shy but steady. "You got it." Mia winked before heading to the galley. Jamal gazed out the window, his fingers tracing the edge of the seat. The world outside was a blur of movement. Baggage trucks zipping by, ground crew guiding planes with glowing batons. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the past hour. He couldn't shake the look on Carla's face when Mr. Harris had stood up for him. It wasn't just hostility. There had been something deeper. Fear, maybe even guilt. Jamal wasn't sure why, but it made him wonder if there was more to her reaction than just a rigid adherence to protocol. Mia returned with his juice, placing it carefully on the tray table. "Here you go. Let me know if you need anything else." "Okay." "Thank you," Jamal said, managing a small smile. As he sipped the cold, sweet juice, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 237 to Atlanta. We're about 10 minutes away from departure. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your devices are in airplane mode. We'll be in the air shortly." The announcement brought a wave of excitement and nerves crashing over Jamal. This was it, his first flight. He thought of his mom back home, probably pacing the living room floor, praying that everything was going smoothly. A sudden movement caught his attention. Mr. Harris, the man who had come to his rescue, was making his way down the aisle. To Jamal's surprise, he stopped right next to his seat. "Mind if I sit here, buddy?" Mr. Harris asked with a friendly smile. Sure," Jamal stammered, surprised but grateful. Mr. Harris eased into the seat beside him, his presence calming. "I figured I'd keep you company for a bit. Flying solo can be a little intimidating, right?" Jamal nodded. "Yeah, it's my first time on a plane." "Well, you're doing great so far," Mr. Harris said. "I've seen grown adults lose their cool at the airport. You handled yourself like a champ." "Thanks," Jamal said quietly. For a few moments, they sat in comfortable silence as the plane taxied toward the runway. The powerful engines rumbled beneath them, vibrating through the floor. "You know," Mr. Harris said thoughtfully, "people like that flight attendant, Carla, sometimes act the way they do because they're carrying their own baggage." Jamal frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well, it's like this. People don't always judge others because they're bad people. Sometimes they're just scared or dealing with stuff you can't see. Doesn't make it right, though." Jamal considered this. He had grown up knowing that people often judged him because of where he lived, the color of his skin, or the way his clothes didn't always fit right. But he had never thought about why they did it beyond just assuming they were mean. "Do you think she's sorry?" Jamal asked hesitantly. Mr. Harris smiled faintly. "I think she might be. And if she's not now, she will be once she thinks about it. As the plane picked up speed down the runway, Jamal's breath caught in his throat. The ground blurred beneath them. And then, with a powerful surge, they lifted into the sky. His stomach flipped, but wonder quickly replaced the nerves. The city below shrank into a patchwork of roads, buildings, and tiny cars. "We're flying," Jamal whispered in awe. "Pretty amazing, huh?" Mr. Harris said, leaning back in his seat. "Yeah," Jamal agreed, a genuine smile breaking across his face. For a while, they simply enjoyed the flight, the plane slicing through clouds and cruising at high altitude. The sky was a vast expanse of blue, and the sun cast a golden glow over the horizon. "So what's waiting for you in Atlanta?" Mr. Harris asked casually. "My Aunt Mariah," Jamal said. "My mom saved up so I could spend the summer with her. She says it's safer there, and I'll get to see new things, maybe even go to a summer camp." "That sounds fantastic," Mr. Harris said. "Your mom must be proud of you." Jamal's expression softened. "She works really hard. I want to make her proud, too." "I'm sure you already do," Mr. Harris said sincerely. Their conversation was interrupted by Mia, who returned with a tray of snacks. "Thought you might be hungry," she said with a smile, setting down a plate of crackers, cheese, and fruit for Jamal. "Thanks," Jamal said, his eyes lighting up at the unexpected treat. As he nibbled on the food, a sense of peace settled over him. The chaos at the gate felt like a distant memory now, and for the first time in a while, Jamal allowed himself to believe that things were going to be okay. But neither he nor Mr. Harris knew that the story was far from over. Back at the airport, Carla was already making a decision that would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted, one that would forever change Jamal's journey and the lives of everyone involved. Secrets take flight. As Flight 237 soared high above the clouds, Jamal leaned back in his wide first-class seat, a sense of calm washing over him. The earlier chaos at the gate now seemed worlds away. He glanced at Mr. Harris, who had dozed off beside him, his head tilted slightly to the side. Jamal smiled to himself. Mr. Harris reminded him of the mentors from the local community center back home, people who showed up when you needed them most, offering guidance and support without expecting anything in return. The hum of the engines was soothing, and for a moment, Jamal allowed himself to dream. He imagined spending the summer with Aunt Mariah, exploring new places, and maybe even making a few friends. His mom had always told him that the world was bigger than the few blocks he knew, and now he was finally getting a chance to see it for himself. As he gazed out the window, lost in thought, a soft ding sounded, followed by the captain's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The flight attendants began moving through the cabin, checking on passengers and offering refreshments. Maya stopped by Jamal's seat again, her smile warm and genuine. "How are you doing, Jamal? Enjoying the flight?" "Yes, ma'am," he said politely. "It's amazing up here." She chuckled. "It really is, isn't it? Let me know if you need anything else." As she walked away, Jamal felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see a young girl around his age sitting in the row behind him. She had curly red hair and freckles that dotted her nose. "Hi," she said brightly. "I saw what happened back at the gate. That lady was so mean. I'm glad you got to fly after all." "Thanks," Jamal said, feeling a little shy. "I'm Lily," she introduced herself. "Where are you headed?" "Atlanta," he said. "My aunt lives there." "Cool. We're going to visit my grandma," Lily said enthusiastically. "First time flying?" "Yeah," Jamal admitted. "You're doing great," she said with a thumbs up. "I cried the first time I flew." Jamal grinned. "Really?" "Yep. Full-on sobbing. My dad had to bribe me with candy to calm me down." Their laughter was interrupted by a sudden announcement from the intercom. "Attention passengers, we have a medical emergency. If there is a doctor or nurse on board, please notify the flight crew immediately." The cheerful atmosphere in the cabin shifted to one of concern. Flight attendants moved quickly, gathering supplies and speaking urgently into their headsets. Jamal's heart raced. "What's happening?" he whispered to Mr. Harris, who had woken up at the announcement. "Sounds like someone's in trouble," Mr. Harris said grimly, already unbuckling his seatbelt. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, stopping near a passenger slumped in their seat. The man's face was pale, and he appeared to be struggling to breathe. "Sir, are you okay?" the attendant asked urgently. I can't," the man gasped. Passengers murmured anxiously, some craning their necks to get a better view. "I'm a doctor," Mr. Harris said, stepping forward. "Let me take a look." The flight attendant nodded gratefully. "Thank you, sir. We have an emergency kit here." Jamal watched in awe as Mr. Harris took charge, his calm demeanor reassuring everyone around him. He examined the man quickly, asking precise questions and instructing the flight attendants on what to do. "His airway is partially obstructed," Mr. Harris explained. "We need to keep him calm and upright. Get me oxygen, and I'll monitor his vitals." The crew moved with urgency, following his instructions. Passengers nearby offered their support, and a sense of unity filled the cabin. As Mr. Harris worked to stabilize the man, Jamal couldn't help but feel a deep admiration for him. The man who had stood up for him at the gate was now saving someone's life at 35,000 feet. After what felt like an eternity, the man's breathing began to stabilize. Color returned to his face, and the tension in the cabin eased. "Thank you," the man whispered weakly. "Just doing my job," Mr. Harris said modestly. The flight attendant spoke into her headset. "The situation is under control. Thank you to Dr. Harris for his quick response." As the crew helped the man into a more comfortable position, Mr. Harris returned to his seat, exhaling deeply. "You okay?" Jamal asked, his eyes wide with admiration. "Yeah," Mr. Harris said with a tired smile. "Just glad he's going to be okay." "You're a real hero," Jamal said earnestly. Mr. Harris chuckled. "Nah, just doing what I was trained to do." Their conversation was interrupted by Mia, who approached with a grateful expression. "Thank you so much, Dr. Harris," she said. "You really saved the day." "Happy to help," he said. Turning to Jamal, Mia added, "Looks like you've got a pretty amazing travel buddy here." Jamal nodded proudly. As the plane continued its journey, the atmosphere in the cabin gradually returned to normal. Passengers chatted quietly, and the flight attendants resumed their duties. But Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that this flight was special, that something bigger was unfolding, connecting the lives of everyone on board in unexpected ways. Back on the ground, Carla sat in the airport lounge, staring at her phone. A news alert flashed across the screen, detailing the medical emergency on Flight 237 and the heroic actions of Dr. Harris. Her heart sank as she read the article, guilt gnawing at her. She thought of Jamal, the boy she had judged too quickly, the boy who was now soaring through the skies, proving that kindness and courage could rise above prejudice and fear. With a deep breath, Carla made a decision. She had been wrong, and it was time to make things right. Redemption in the skies. The steady hum of the engines filled the cabin as Flight 237 cruised smoothly above the clouds. Jamal sat quietly by the window, the vast expanse of blue stretching endlessly beyond the horizon. Despite the calm atmosphere, his mind raced with thoughts of everything that had happened, from the confrontation at the boarding gate to witnessing Mr. Harris' heroic actions. The events of the flight felt surreal, like pieces of a story unfolding in real time. Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that he was part of something bigger, something that would leave a lasting impact. Beside him, Mr. Harris sipped from a cup of coffee, his expression thoughtful but relaxed. The weight of the medical emergency seemed to have lifted from his shoulders. "You okay, Jamal?" Mr. Harris asked, noticing the boy's contemplative silence. "Yeah," Jamal said softly, "just thinking about everything. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it?" Mr. Harris said with a chuckle. Jamal nodded. I've never seen someone help someone else like that before. You didn't even hesitate." Mr. Harris smiled warmly. "Sometimes you just have to step up when you're needed. It's what being a doctor and a decent person is all about." Jamal absorbed the words, thinking about his own life and the times his mom had stepped up for him despite their struggles. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Carla sat in a quiet corner of the employee lounge, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The article detailing the events on Flight 237 was still open on her screen. Her heart raced as she reread the headline. "Doctor saves passenger mid-flight. Acts of courage on Flight 237. The article praised Dr. Harris's quick thinking and calm demeanor, describing how he had stabilized a passenger experiencing a severe medical emergency. The story also mentioned how the airline crew had handled the situation professionally, though Carla knew she had played no part in that success. Her gaze lingered on the mention of a young passenger who had witnessed the events unfold. She knew it was Jamal. Guilt gnawed at her. Her decision to remove him from the flight had been hasty and unfair. Carla prided herself on following protocol, but deep down, she knew that her actions had been influenced by biases she had never confronted. She couldn't shake the memory of Jamal's frightened face as she told him he couldn't board. The realization hit her hard. She had judged a child without knowing his story. With a deep breath, Carla made up her mind. She needed to make things right, not just for Jamal but for herself as well. Back on the plane, Jamal and Mr. Harris were sharing stories when Maya returned with a tray of desserts. "Thought you two might like something sweet," she said cheerfully, setting down 2 plates with slices of chocolate cake. "Thank you, Mom," Jamal said politely. As they enjoyed the treat, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Atlanta shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are in the upright position. We'll be on the ground in about 20 minutes. Jamal's heart fluttered with excitement. He was one step closer to seeing Aunt Mariah and starting a new chapter of his life. "You ready for Atlanta?" Mr. Harris asked. "Yeah," Jamal said with a grin. "I think it's going to be amazing." "I think so too," Mr. Harris said warmly. The plane began its descent, the landscape below becoming clearer with each passing minute. Fields, highways, and clusters of buildings stretched out as far as the eye could see. Jamal pressed his face to the window, marveling at the sight. When the wheels touched down on the runway, a sense of triumph filled Jamal's chest. He had made it. As the plane taxied to the gate, Maya returned one last time. "It was a pleasure having you on board, Jamal," she said sincerely. "You're a remarkable young man." "Thank you, Ma'am," Jamal said, his voice steady and confident. As they disembarked, Mr. Harris walked with Jamal through the bustling terminal. Aunt Mariah was waiting near the baggage claim, her smile radiant as she spotted Jamal. "There's my favorite nephew," she called out, pulling him into a warm embrace. "Hi, Aunt Mariah," Jamal said, his heart full of happiness. "Thank you for looking out for him," she said to Mr. Harris, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It was my pleasure," Mr. Harris said. "He's a remarkable kid." Jamal beamed at the praise. As they exchanged goodbyes, Mr. Harris handed Jamal a business card. "If you ever need anything, you give me a call, okay?" "I will," Jamal promised. With that, Mr. Harris walked away, blending into the crowd. Later that evening, Carla sat in her small apartment, staring at her computer screen. She had drafted an email to the airline's customer service department, detailing her actions and requesting to personally apologize to Jamal and his family. It wasn't just about clearing her conscience. It was about taking responsibility and learning from her mistakes. As she hit send, Carla felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The road to redemption wouldn't be easy, but it was a journey worth taking. Back in Atlanta, Jamal sat on Aunt Mariah's porch, watching fireflies dance in the warm evening air. His journey had been filled with challenges, but it had also shown him the power of kindness, courage, and redemption. And as he looked up at the starry sky, Jamal knew that his story was just beginning. A new beginning, The soft hum of crickets filled the warm night air as Jamal sat on Aunt Mariah's porch, his legs swinging back and forth. The events of the day replayed in his mind like a movie, each scene vivid and unforgettable. The confrontation at the gate, the tense moments in the air, and Mr. Harris's life-saving actions had left an indelible mark on his heart. Aunt Mariah, a tall woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile, brought out 2 glasses of sweet tea. She handed one to Jamal and sat beside him on the weathered porch swing. "You doing okay, baby?" she asked gently. Jamal nodded, taking a sip of the cool, sugary drink. "Yeah, just thinking about everything." "Sounds like you've had quite the adventure," Aunt Mariah said, her eyes twinkling. "Your mama would be so proud of how you handled yourself." Jamal's chest swelled with pride at the mention of his mother. She had always taught him to stay strong and face life's challenges head-on. "You know," Aunt Mariah continued, "sometimes life throws us into situations we don't expect, but how we respond is what makes all the difference." Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "I met this guy on the plane, Mr. Harris. He was amazing, Aunt Mariah. He saved someone's life right there on the plane." "That's incredible," she said, genuinely impressed. "And he stood up for me back at the gate when that lady tried to kick me off the flight," Jamal added, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I don't think I would have made it without him." Aunt Mariah placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Sounds like Mr. Harris was an angel sent your way. But don't forget, Jamal, you've got your own strength too. You faced that situation with courage, and that's something to be proud of." Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The next morning, the sun rose over Atlanta, casting a golden glow across the city. Aunt Mariah had a hearty breakfast waiting for Jamal: fluffy pancakes, crispy bacon, and fresh fruit. "You better eat up," she said with a laugh. "We've got a big day ahead." As they sat down to eat, Aunt Mariah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her brow furrowed. "What is it?" Jamal asked. "It's an email from the airline," she said, reading intently. "Looks like that flight attendant, Carla, wants to meet and apologize to you in person." Jamal's eyes widened. "Really?" "No, Mom," Aunt Mariah confirmed. "She says she realized she was wrong and wants to make things right." Jamal thought for a moment. Part of him wanted to forget the whole thing, but another part understood the importance of forgiveness. "Do you want to meet her?" Aunt Mariah asked gently. Jamal took a deep breath. "Yeah, I think I do." Later that afternoon, they arrived at a cozy cafe near downtown Atlanta. Carla was already waiting at a table by the window, looking nervous but determined. She stood as they approached, her expression earnest. "Jamal, thank you for coming." Jamal nodded politely. "Hi." Carla gestured to the seats. "Please, sit." Once they were settled, Carla took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, Jamal. I judged you unfairly and made a terrible mistake. There's no excuse for what I did, and I'm truly sorry." Jamal studied her face, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. Carla looked down, shame flickering across her face. "I let my biases get the better of me. I've been doing this job for years, and sometimes I make assumptions without even realizing it. But that's not your fault, and it wasn't right." Aunt Mariah placed a comforting hand on Jamal's back, giving him the courage to speak. "I was scared," Jamal admitted. "It was my first time flying, and I didn't know what to expect. When you told me I couldn't get on the plane, I thought I'd never see my aunt." Carla's eyes glistened with tears. "I'm so sorry, Jamal. I can't change what happened, but I want to do better. Meeting you has already changed how I see things." Jamal took a deep breath. "I forgive you." Carla's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. As they finished their conversation, Carla promised to advocate for better training at the airline to prevent situations like this from happening again. A few days later, Jamal and Aunt Mariah stood on a hill overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the distance, a symbol of endless possibilities. "You know," Aunt Mariah said, "you've got a bright future ahead of you, Jamal. Don't let anyone dim your light." Jamal smiled confidently. "I won't, Aunt Mariah." As they walked back down the hill, Jamal felt a newfound sense of purpose. The journey that had started with fear and uncertainty had transformed into one of courage, forgiveness, and growth. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but he also knew he had the strength to face them, and the kindness of people like Mr. Harris and Aunt Mariah to guide him. The sky above was vast and open, just like the future waiting for Jamal. And as he took each step forward, he carried the lessons of that unforgettable flight with him, a testament to the power of resilience, redemption, and the boundless potential of the human spirit.